Really?
Yeah, don't know.
Oh. First thing I'm going to ask.
There you go.
We're back on Morning Brew with friends. My old friend Tom Garrity. And every year, Tom Garrity and his company, they commission a thing from research and polling called the New Mexico Perception Study, the Garrity Perception Study. And it's, how many years have you been doing this now?
This is our 6th year.
Is it our 6th year already?
Yeah.
And every year you guys ask some pointed questions to New Mexicans and you say, what do you think about it? And you take a nice little snapshot of what the state is thinking every year. And now, after 6 years, we're starting to see some good little trends. We're starting to see some real data points on the state.
Yeah, you know, when the Garrity Group commissioned the Garrity Perception Survey and commissioned research and polling to do this, we wanted to make sure it was scientific, so it's a 95% confidence level. We wanted to make sure that it was not us, because, you know, we work with clients in a lot of these industries, and we didn't want anyone saying, oh, well, they're just trying to make their clients look good and stuff. And so when we measured the 18 different industries in New Mexico, seeing those kind of trends over the last 6 years is fascinating, because we can really kind of see, one, how the oil and gas industry is finally starting to be viewed as a favorable industry. And we've also seen how the San Diego National Labs in Los Alamos have started to decrease in favorability.
And that's, both of those things are fascinating to me, is that, you know, for years, the oil and gas industry was painted as big, bad, you know, oil guys who are spilling oil. And now I think people are starting to come around to realize that not everybody is spilling oil in the Gulf.
No, you know, it's well, like any industry, you know, like we've seen with, you know, federal trust of state and federal officials. You know, the distrust is tremendously high. But, you know, there's typically one or two bad apples that will ruin it for everybody. And so I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of key industries around the state.
Actually, speaking of the federal government side of things, on the back page of the survey, I think this is really fascinating. You asked people what the cause of the problems in the government was, and number one was elected officials who were not willing to compromise. And I think that's interesting, because one of the reasons I know the Tea Party became a force was because they said we are not going to compromise. But your survey says that that's actually one of the problems.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, and of course, tomorrow's primary day. And so this
That's
has
why
a
I'm
little
interested
bit
in the
more
political
relevance.
stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I have some other political nuggets as well. But to answer your question specifically, when we start looking at, you know, the differences and the frustration and anger with federal government, we actually see it's a bipartisan kind of anger. It's not Republicans more so over Democrats. It's really kind of a bipartisan frustration and anger.
It's really 43% of the state in general. Not just one party.
Correct.
So, with the survey, just a quick question: do you ask registered voters, just regular New Mexicans? Do you just pick up the phone and call people? How does? And I know Research and Polling has been doing this forever. They're one of the best in the business.
Oh, absolutely.
But you can, when you basically commission a poll, you can have them ask many different people.
Correct. Yeah, and so it is a scientific survey. You know, people, you know, are not. You know, actually, it follows the census, the 2010 census. So, you know, if there are X percent of residents who are registered to vote, then we're going to have that type of representation. We don't want to have any overrepresentation in, say, you know, Hobbs, or underrepresentation in Hobbs versus Albuquerque versus Santa Fe. Another interesting thing about this year's survey is kind of playing out the division that we're seeing amongst those who identify themselves as Republicans. Again, not all those who vote or are registered to vote, but those who identify themselves as Republican as opposed to Democrat. But inside the Republicans specifically, there is a divide between those who identify themselves as somewhat conservative or conservative. And we're seeing splits on issues, whether it's support of the oil and gas industry, support of the solar wind industry, support of public education. And we find that while, you know, oil and gas tends to be very much supported by conservatives, the somewhat conservatives are tending to side more with the middle and with the liberals. And so we find that that kind of split is playing out nationally, as I think the Republican Party is starting to figure out, okay, what do we do from here?
Right. Well, New Mexico, I know in presidential election years, has always been a bellwether state.
It has, yeah.
And is that, do you think that all of these trends we're seeing in this survey are also playing out nationwide?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of those as far as from a political perspective. You know, of course, you know, we don't necessarily coordinate ours with others, but, you know, you look at the Pew Research Institute, Pew supports a lot of the items that we're seeing here in New Mexico playing out on a national level. Earlier, you asked about, you know, how we get the voters. You know, well, the crosstabs really allow us to get into household income, how people think in New Mexico, who they trust, what level of...
Who do New Mexicans trust? I think that's one of the most interesting questions in the survey every year.
Yeah.
Is the questions of who do we trust? Do we trust the feds? Do we trust state government? Do we trust businesses? Do we trust corporations? Who do we trust?
Blood is thicker than water. And so, we trust family.
Right.
And we trust our relatives more than any others. Those on the other side of the spectrum, federal government, state government officials, journalists, and advertising executives.
Yeah, all my favorite people.
I know, right? But, something else that's kind of interesting. This year's survey we asked how much of a role businesses should have in solving the state's economic problems. And overwhelming 76% said business leaders need to be involved in the private sector needs to be involved in those particular solutions. So
that's
like Innovate, Educate, for example, is a great example of how that's playing out.
Well, so is Innovate ABQ, which the folks who were just here.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that is the private sector stepping in and working with the public sector to solve the economic development issues of the city.
Yeah, and then the other
But are they
side
talking about, though, real quick, are they talking
Yeah.
about more the social issues, or are they talking about economic development issues, or did you get a chance to do that deep dive?
Yeah, specifically economic development is 76%. But when we asked residents the role business executives and owners should have in solving the state's social problems, 71% said business needs to be more involved. And that's really quite surprising.
Right.
Because when you think about it, those who are traditionally liberal or Democrat will say, you know what, we don't really want the business sector's involvement.
Right.
And then, those who are typically conservative or Republican will tend to say, people need to fend for themselves, so we need to be able to wrap in the social issues. But to have both of those entities, both parties, say, you know what, we need businesses to be more involved. I think is a great opportunity for business leaders to propose things like, legislation that goes beyond tax breaks, but really addresses the social issues and social welfare in our state.
Right. You think that's because the conversation has shifted since the recession?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think in New Mexico, that conversation is still continuing.
Right.
But post-recession, as government is contracting in its services, we've seen in New Mexico, the large number of people who are qualifying for some type of Medicaid, Medicare.
And food stamp use is way up.
Yeah.
All the social programs are.
Yeah, and so when you look at the potential that by July 2017 of close to 50% of New Mexico's resident base could be eligible for some kind of federal funding. Federal aid, that sends up a big alarm. And, I think the business sector says, you know what, we are involved, we just have to step it up. But the independent, the people who are the typical resident are saying, you know what, we're in a dire situation, we need businesses' help.
Right. Well, what do you think was the most interesting question this year? What was the one that you were just like, you couldn't wait to ask and find out?
Well, the one that I wanted to, that one would be, how people access news and information. Because we ask for every year. We're all hearing about the rise of social media.
How are we doing in the TV world? In the TV world, are we doing
still
great?
Dominates.
Okay,
and I'm not just saying that. I backed it up with research right here. And people can get a copy of this at GarrityPerceptionSurvey.com. By the way, it's a free survey. It's just a resource we make available. But TV is still #1, and we back it up by research.
I love that. Well, you can find the survey at GarrityPerceptionSurvey.com
or GarrityPR.com.
That makes it super easy. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Dan.
We used to have lunch every now and then.
I know.
We need to do that again. We're back in a couple of seconds in the Morning Brew.